I'm Jonathan Del Arco, and I'm on ComicsOnline.
Jonathan, so excited to celebrate the world of Star Trek with you in Chicago this weekend. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
My pleasure.
So Hugh has had quite an evolution over the years, from The Next Generation all the way through Star Trek Picard. But I would love to start off with your earliest memories of Star Trek. Prior to The Next Generation, what was your entry point, personally with Star Trek? What's the first thing you remember?
So I started watching Star Trek when my family moved us to the U.S. The original series was in syndication at the time. And along with Star Trek and other series of the 1970s, I guess you would say, that's how I learned English, was watching these shows. So it was a very formative part of my childhood, the reruns of the original series. So that was my initial introduction into Star Trek. And then in my 20s, I got to test for the role of Wesley Crusher. So I had that experience, and then I got to obviously play Hugh. So it was a nice progression.
So getting to return as Hugh all these years later, what was it like stepping onto the set with Star Trek Picard with a few familiar faces, but just more re-entering the world of Trek after so many years?
It was such a magical experience because the sets of Picard were so extravagant and huge, and the budget was so large that it felt like the experience on steroids almost. There was so much hype around it, and also so much secrecy. We couldn't tell our friends we were doing the show. We had to hide when we drove into the lot. They were very careful about fans finding out what the new makeup was and who was in the series. So it was quite a fun moment to kind of keep hidden, and then also to then be able to reveal it at Comic-Con the day that we sort of came out of the closet and told everyone Jerry and I were in the show, and Brent was in the show, and Jonathan Frakes was in the show. So it was a really fun year that way.
You brought up the makeup. I'd love to hear just the Borg makeup in general always seemed so intricate. What was the process like getting to essentially suit up for your character each time?
In the original series?
In the original, in Next Generation.
Yeah, hell. It was hell. If you remember, the Borg before Hugh were basically stuntmen and women. I think there were a couple of women in the Best of Both Worlds, Part 1 and 2. So those costumes were not designed for wearing them a long time. They were designed for one-offs, a stunt person coming in for the day and shooting a stunt and, being in the background. They weren't intricate enough for a character that was going to be on camera a lot in a lot of close-ups. And so they created mine out of scrap pieces that they had of the previous people that had worn. They were all... it was like a jigsaw puzzle. They were just like a piece of a leg from one person, an arm of another, and they just kind of found pieces and put them on me, and that's kind of how the costume developed. And because of that, it wasn't particularly easy to get in and out of. This was a bit of a hellacious experience, to be honest.
Well, let's go a little bit earlier in your career. I'd love to just hear, how did you find yourself working in the world of entertainment?
I wanted to be an actor since I was a little kid, and I lived in New York, and so I had access to acting schools and theater and opportunities to develop myself as an actor. And so I started auditioning for Broadway plays when I was in my mid-teens, 16, 15, and then eventually at 18 I got my first job in a Broadway show that was touring the country. So that's how it began, and then I moved into New York City and had an agent and started auditioning for movies and TV jobs, and eventually moved to LA. That's when I got Star Trek.
Wonderful. Well, my last question, non-Star Trek related, Boy Meets World.
I know.
If one of my favorite shows growing up. I'd love to hear any memories from your time on that set in particular.
It's so crazy because I just did a podcast of Pod Meets World. I had no idea the show had this whole new resurgence, and all these young people are watching it now. So I just did a whole podcast on a role I played one episode of. I was telling them on the podcast, the people that were on the show, the cast members, that I was way older than the character I was playing, and I was acting with a bunch of kids. So my memory was just thinking, these kids are nuts. They were super hormonal or something. They were in that teenage stage while I was in my late 20s playing a teenager. So that was my biggest memory, is thinking like I was working with these kids, playing one of them, and how odd that was.
Do you have any other appearances coming up?
No, but I have a film that I did during the pandemic that's finally coming to theaters October 18th. It's called The Grotto. It's a beautiful little movie directed by Joanna Gleason, who's a big Broadway star. It's her first film she's directing. So that will be in select theaters across the country, and then hopefully streaming somewhere. So awesome. I'm hoping everyone gets to see that.